Welcome back, kids, to the Children's Church here at Christ Community Church of Ocala. Today, we're going to do one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament and one of my favorite characters. This morning, we're going to be talking about how in the beginning, God worked in another troubled family. The story of Joseph the Dreamer. Wow. This is how the story goes. I love this. Now, remember this guy called Israel from last week's lesson? His name used to be Jacob. He wrestled with God and God changed his name. Well, he had lots of money and lots of wealth. He also had lots of sons. He had 12 sons. And guess what? Remember I told you it was a troubled family? Well, it was troubled because he had a favorite son. His baby son, his youngest son, the son of his favorite wife, Rachel. His name was Joseph. And he got a special robe all for him from Daddy. See all the lovely colors it has and how it shows that he's the favorite. And look at his brothers. Do they look like they're really happy about this? I don't think so. See, they don't look real happy about this. In fact, not only did they not like it, they hated his guts. They hated him so much that they wouldn't be able to say anything good to him at all. Could you imagine that? Having all those brothers and none of them will ever say anything good to you. Not a good situation. Well, things went from bad to worse. You see, one day, Joseph had some dreams. These dreams came from God. They actually foretold the future, things that were going to happen. Well, guess what? Joseph wasn't particularly wise back then because he told these dreams to his brothers. Well, here's how the dream went. He had a dream that him and his brothers were all sheaves of grain. See the sheaves of grain? Well, his sheaf of grain stood up in the middle. And all of his brothers' sheaves, they circled around him. And they bowed down to him. Ooh, that meant that in the future, his brothers were going to bow down to him like he was some kind of ruler over them. Yeah, how do you think that made them feel? Well, it got worse. He actually had another dream from God. This one showed the sun and the moon and all the stars. They were all bowing down to him. That dream meant that not only were his brothers going to bow down to him as some kind of ruler, so was his mother and father. They didn't like him because he was going to be a ruler over them, and they hated his guts. So, not a good situation. Well, after all these dreams, one day, his dad, he's going to send his brother, his favorite son Joseph, out to check on his brothers. Because his brothers were out watching Daddy's sheep. He had done this once before, and Joseph brought back a bad report about them. And now, he's doing it again. So he sends him out. And his brothers, they see him coming. See the coat of many colors? They see him and they hate him in their hearts. And they decide, we're going to kill him. This is not good. Well, Reuben, the oldest of the brother, he wants to save Joseph's life. Maybe he wants to get back into Daddy's good graces. We don't know, but he tried to save him. He said, okay, don't kill him. Don't kill our little brother, but what we want to do is we're going to toss him in this cistern right here. See that thing? That's like a big well. Wow, this could be very dangerous. If there's water in there, he could drown. So they grab him and they throw him in. Well, good thing for him, you see, that cistern was not filled with any water. If it had been, he could have drowned. But as it was, he was still stuck. He couldn't get out. He couldn't drink any water. There was no food. He was going to die there. Well, Reuben, he left. And guess what happened when Reuben left? His brothers saw some Ishmaelite merchants. They were heading down to Egypt. They were going to sell everything that they had in their caravan. And one thing they had in their caravan was slaves. So they had an evil idea. They thought, why just kill Joseph? We can make some money on this deal. So they decided to remove him from the cistern and sell him to these Ishmaelite merchants as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. Wow. Maybe that's worse than killing, but it's bad either way. Well, they had to figure out something to tell Dad, because Dad was going to wonder where Joseph was. So they said, okay, we're going to take that coat of many colors and we're going to tear it up a little bit. We're going to scratch it and cut it, and then we're going to dip it in blood to make it look like he'd been killed by a wild animal. We can lie to our daddy and tell him that maybe Joseph was killed by a wild animal. He would believe that. What do you think, guys? Well, they did that. They took the coat to their dad Israel, showed it to him, and he looked and he believed. He was deceived by his own sons that his favorite son Joseph had been killed by a wild animal and was gone. That's sad. This was a very, very bad family, wasn't it? Well, meanwhile, those merchants, they took him all the way to Egypt and sold him as a slave. He was sold to a guy called Potiphar. He was an important and pretty rich Egyptian. He was the captain of Pharaoh's guard, in charge of the Pharaoh's private security. He also was in charge of a prison. So that's where Joseph went. Now, even though he was not supposed to be a slave, he decided to trust in God and wait. So he did what he was supposed to do as a slave. He worked hard. He obeyed his master. He did the right thing. And guess what? Everything he did was blessed. He worked in the fields were blessed. He worked in the house was blessed. He worked in the garage, helping them out, fixing the wheels and things. And guess what? Everything in the garage was blessed. God was with him. Well, guess what? Potiphar, he was wise and he saw. He looked and he noticed everything this guy Joseph is doing is turning out great. He's blessed. Wow. I'm going to start putting him in charge of more things. I'm going to put him in charge of the field and the house and the garage. I'm going to put him in charge of everything. And guess what? That's exactly what he did. He was in charge of the servants, the house, his property, his money. And everything that Joseph put his hands to was blessed. And because of that, guess what? Because of Joseph, Potiphar was becoming very wealthy. See, he was a wise man. Well, Potiphar wasn't the only person who noticed just how good Joseph was. Unfortunately, the person who also noticed was Potiphar's wife. This is not good. See, she saw that he was tall and handsome and smart and well blessed, and she liked him. Unfortunately, she was not interested in doing anything good. She wanted him to sin with her. Well, he didn't think this was a good idea. So he would have nothing to do with her. She kept trying to get him day after day after day. She said, come with me and let's do some bad thing. And he said, no, won't do it, won't do it. You see, your husband, he put me in charge of everything. The only thing I'm not in charge of is you, because you're his wife. I can't do this evil because it would be bad and God wouldn't like it. He was faithful and he loved his God, so he wouldn't sin. Well, she kept trying, and one day she sent everybody out of the house so she could trick him and maybe get him to do something bad while everybody was gone. And he said, no, won't do it. In fact, she grabbed his cloak and he left his cloak in her hands and ran out of the house because he wouldn't do it. Well, she held that cloak. And when her husband came home, she lied. She told her husband Potiphar that it was Joseph who was trying to do all the bad things. That he was the one who was trying to sin. He was the one who was trying to do something bad with her, his wife. Well, he heard this, but I'm not entirely sure that he believed her. Because he could have had Joseph killed, but he did not. What he did do, however, he had Joseph taken and put into prison. A special prison for the people who the Pharaoh wanted to keep. And it was the prison, I think, that Potiphar was actually in charge of. So he went to prison. And in prison, Joseph was probably wondering, God, what is going on? I love you. I was obedient. I was faithful. I was doing the right things. I wouldn't sin. But I'm in prison because she lied. But God, he still had a lot in store for Joseph. See, things weren't over here. What happened was, while in prison, he continued to be faithful to God. He was still obedient. He worked hard. He was faithful in anything that he was assigned to do. In fact, I think that maybe the guard who was in charge of the prison might have heard from Potiphar about Joseph, because eventually he started putting Joseph in charge of things. And guess what? Yeah, you guessed it. Everything that this guy put Joseph in charge of was blessed. Put him in charge of the prisoners, was blessed. He put him in charge of the food, blessed. He put him in charge of cleaning, blessed. Well, guess what? He got more and more and more in Joseph's care, and eventually he put him in charge of everything. And everything in the prison was blessed because Joseph was there, taking care of it, being faithful, waiting for God's timing. And sure enough, God did have more in store for Joseph. But Joseph had to wait. He had to wait for God's timing. But he remained faithful and true to God in all that he did. Now, that's the story, the beginning of the story. There's going to be more coming next week. But what have we learned this morning? Well, first of all, we learned that God has a plan for all of us. We don't know what it is. We don't know how it's going to work out. But he does have a plan for us. And, well, if we don't have and we don't ask for God's wisdom, it can cause problems. Like he got sold as a slave because his brothers hated him because he wasn't wise. So, we also learned that God will give us wisdom when we ask, gladly. Why? Because he loves us and he wants us to be wise as he is wise. And just like Joseph, we should be faithful in everything that God gives us to do. And even as children, God has given you things to do. Things like doing your work, doing your chores, obeying your parents. Those are things that we can be faithful in, just like Joseph was. And we should wait and watch for God's timing, because God has a time for everything in your lives, just like he did in Joseph's. Our memory verse reminds us of this. For the Lord, he gives wisdom, and from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. We find that in Proverbs 2:6. That's a reminder. Wisdom comes from God, and he gives it to all of us who ask. Why? Because he loves us. Okay, guys, that's the beginning of the story of Joseph. More coming next week. So let's close this lesson in prayer. So everybody out there, close your eyes, bow your heads, and pray with me. Father, thank you for this blessing of this story of Joseph and how you've watched his life like you're watching ours, and you love him like you love us. Help us to be good and faithful and wait for your timing, just like he did. And we thank you for this in Jesus' name. And everybody says, Amen. Okay, kids, we'll see you next week for more of the story of Joseph. Bye.